The crisis in Mexico had reached a tipping point, and influential leaders felt drastic measures needed to be taken to prevent the country's dissolution. In the early autumn of 1841, Mariano Paredes, a conservative and monarchist, met with Santa Anna west of the capital in a place called Tacubaya and formed a junta to overthrow the government. In many ways, the two men made an unlikely team, given that Santa Anna was a Republican, but the cunning general from Veracruz ultimately used the opportunity not only to depose a government he believed was incapable of addressing the existential crisis caused by the breakaway republics, but also to have Paredes himself pushed aside. To make this maneuver palatable to the scheming classes in Mexico City, Santa Anna formally adopted the tenets of centralism and seized power with the help of more articulate and like-minded Santanistas such as José Tornel. According to Santa Anna's biographer Will Fowler, the Veracruzan had long believed in the principles of federalism, but, quote, the major task of reconquering Texas and bringing an end to the secessionist revolt in Yucatan took priority over political philosophy. Another factor Santa Anna had to keep in mind was, quote, the growing threat posed by the United States, which was beginning to take a more active and ominous interest in Mexican affairs vis-a-vis Texas. In May 1842, Mexicans even attempted to address the flow of men and munitions into Texas from the United States, with a protest indicating the latter could be in violation of treaty terms. But these concerns were dismissed. If Mexico could not unite and a larger war against the United States broke out, victory would be difficult to achieve. And that is from a relatively new book, The Wars of the Mexican Gulf, the Breakaway Republics of Texas and the Yucatan, the U.S.-Mexican War, and the Limits of Empire, 1835 to 1850, by Benjamin J. Swenson, 2024. I'm Joshua Treviño, and this is The Hard Country.
Hey y'all, and welcome back to The Hard Country. My name is Ariana Guajardo, and I'm excited to be joining Joshua Treviño on this episode, as always. I want to dive right in because the Texas Public Policy Foundation, in collaboration with the America First Policy Institute, has just released a situation memorandum about dealing with Mexico and the Mexico threat, written by Joshua Treviño.
Yes.
So this was, it was long, and even though it had like a lot of substance to it, it was one of the most digestible works of this length that I've been able to read.
Oh, thank you.
And especially coming from a think tank, we can get a little bit wonky. So this is, I think, digestible, even if you're someone like me who's like not always in the weeds about this kind of stuff to look in. So I'm so excited to be getting your take on what is happening over there.
Thanks.
But first, something that's interesting is the excerpt that you decided to read is talking about this pull of centralism that's was happening in Mexico during that time.
Yeah.
And I think we might be seeing a little bit of a return to that. Would you say that that's the case?
Absolutely. Absolutely. You know, there's a saying in Chinese civics that the empire united must divide and the empire divided must unite. And it's the push-pull of Chinese history. It's what it's supposed to eliminate. And Mexico has a very similar phenomenon to it. You know, we have to understand that Mexico is a polity. I don't mean as a nation, that's something qualitatively different, but as a polity has never successfully resolved the tension between centralism and federalism in its own history. And so it pulls apart, it comes together, and you see it's almost like a sine wave. It sort of alternates. And we've discussed it before on the show, I believe, but in the pulling apart eras in which there's pluralism in Mexico and something like an attempt at true federalism, you usually end up with great civic violence, which is then resolved with a centralist government. And so the last episode of true centralism in Mexico that we saw was, of course, the pre-dictatorship that's basically from the 1920s all the way through the year 2000. And we've had pluralism since. It's probably the pendulum swinging back at this point for reasons we can get into in the show. But that's why I chose that, because the themes and what we see in Mexico now is in many ways the same thing that we've seen in Mexico for the past 200 years. And we just have to understand that it's cyclical. But because it's cyclical and because it's longstanding, there are also avenues for dealing with it on the American side.
Yeah, and it seems like even then they're identifying that the threat to that kind of centralist ideology was the American government once again. Yeah. So we're kind of, again, like talking about those cycles. It seems like we're back in the same place that we were so many years ago.
Yeah.
So let's dive into this and like what the situation is in Mexico right now.
Yeah.
And let's start at the top of the administration with the Sheinbaum administration, with her. Something that is interesting is I don't think that what you were expecting is necessarily what's happening right now. So
Yeah.
what were you expecting from Sheinbaum, and what did we get?
Well, so President Claudia Sheinbaum of Mexico, she's been in office since, I believe, October 1st, 2024. Right. The successor to the very charismatic and era-defining Andrés Manuel López Obrador. Also, for the record, likely a Sinaloa cartel agent for the past 20 years or so. My expectation of her, and I guess I should preface this by saying that we were just in Mexico City for about a week, myself, some colleagues, and having a lot of conversations. So all this is fairly recent, coming back from Mexico City, talking with a variety of individuals, both on and off the record, which we will respect in this show. And kind of getting information about what's happening in Mexico. So you're asking about Sheinbaum. It's painful for me to discuss because I was wrong. No, I'm wrong a lot about stuff, but I was wrong on this policy front. I really believed, and in fact we did several shows in which we talked about this, I thought that Claudia Sheinbaum was going to be a non-entity in governance. And there was some empirical justification for that. She ran a very ham-handed campaign. Now, to her credit, she also won this crushing supermajority, so it didn't matter that it was ham-handed. And she also got the dedazo, which is the kind of the pick to be the next person in line from the ruling regime, in no small part because she really didn't have an internal constituency within the Morena coalition. So had AMLO gone ahead and picked, Adán Augusto López or Marcelo Ebrard, each one of them had a more or less well-defined faction. Claudia Sheinbaum really didn't. She was mayor of Mexico City for many, many years, and she was really known as a lieutenant and a deputy of Andrés Manuel for most of the past 25 years at this point. She has this reputation as being like a scientist, but I don't think she's done anything in the sciences since 1997. I don't say that as disparagement, by the way. I've never done anything in the sciences. With that in mind, my expectation was that given that she lacked a constituency, and also given that even in the first 60 days after she assumed office, there was more than one episode of Andrés Manuel reaching in to the Mexican Congress, for example, and imposing his will over hers, particularly in the area of personnel appointments. I thought that she would be the person not really in charge. My assumption, which I said publicly on more than one occasion, was that she would be the Dmitry Medvedev of Mexican politics, which, Medvedev was the placeholder president. He wasn't really in charge of Russia in between Putin's two terms. This is back when Putin cared about observing at least the fiction of legality within Russia. But he wasn't really in charge. Putin was the prime minister. And so I thought Andrés Manuel would continue in charge. And up through really the past, I would say 45 days or so, there's a lot of substantiation to that. But I have to say I was wrong. And all of us who expected her to be kind of a weak read. Yeah, the titulo, right? Like the puppet president, were wrong about it. She has turned out to be somebody who has a very canny control, might be overstating it, but certainly stewardship of her party and coalition. And she has done a fantastic job. If you're Mexican, it's not good for us. But if you're Mexican, she's done an absolutely fantastic job of managing the relationship with the United States. And there's a lot of examples of that which we can go into. But I'll just give you one anecdote to close. On my flight back from Mexico City several days ago, I actually sat next to a woman who is a lawyer. She's not, I think, I won't say who she was, but she was a member of the legal profession. She was not from the Morena base, I'll put it that way. Certainly not from like the ordinary Morena constituency. And we talked, and she was over the moon proud, and that's the word she used. She was very, very proud of how her presidenta had done versus the United States. And you know what? Kind of had to agree with her. If I were Mexican, I would be proud too. You got to give this to the Mexican state. They can't guarantee public safety or clean water, but they are great at dealing with the United States. And full credit to President Claudia Sheinbaum for that.
So then let's, I guess, just set the stage a little bit more about where things are. What, we understood, at least to some degree, the AMLO administration and what we were dealing with. What does Sheinbaum's administration look like in contrast?
Well, good question. She's a fundamentally different character type, obviously, than AMLO. What I'm told by people who know her, and just to be transparent up front with you, the viewer, I've never met her, so my information on her is secondhand. But I've met with people who've met with her, and I've met with advisors of hers, and I've met with individuals who are involved in Mexican governance at her level. And what they say the big differences are is that Andrés Manuel was an individual who was he's very bombastic, very impatient with details. You couldn't give him detailed briefings. He was a theatrical and instinct-driven person. And Andrés Manuel was reportedly also extremely incurious about the outside world. And you kind of saw that in his foreign travels. He hated to go abroad, didn't really like he didn't really like talking to anybody about other Mexicans, which is fine. There's nothing unvirtuous about that, but it affected the mode of his governance. And so if you had, for example, this is a real-world example that I was given, if you had an hour-long planning meeting that was helmed by the former president of Mexico, Andrés Manuel might show up for the first 10 minutes. And he would do one of two things. He would either leave or he would take over the meeting and just conduct a monologue on something of his own interest. Claudia is apparently not like that. Claudia will schedule a 2-hour meeting and she'll be there involved in the details the entire time. She's very detail focused. She's very attentive to a lot of nuance. She actually reads the briefing papers. Like, imagine that. As a policy person, that warms my heart. But she is willing and able to conduct a style of personal diplomacy with the President of the United States, with Christine Ohm, the DHS secretary that we saw just a few days back, with any significant individual who comes visit, that is by all accounts extremely effective. She just has a deft touch that frankly was not visible to me and to a lot of people during the campaign or prior to her ascent to the presidency. But you got to give her credit. She's done well. And again, as I talk about in this memorandum that we've just posted at texaspolicy.com, which I think we'll talk about in the bulk of the show, all this is quite bad for the United States. But if you're a Morenista, if you're a member of the Mexican regime, it's very good.
Yeah. And I mean, speaking about the way that she was able to use her administration so far to, I guess, at least get a little bit cozy with the United States was her role in helping shut down some of the trafficking and fentanyl across our border.
Right.
So, but the thing that is really shocking is how quickly she was able to do that within her administration.
Yeah. Why is that?
Well, that's I'll lead that question to you, Josh.
Okay.
What happened there? Because you do mention it in the memorandum. What is your thought on how she was able to shut things down so quickly?
Look, longtime viewers here know that our theory of the Mexican state, which has only been substantiated over many years of work, is that the Mexican state, and especially the Morena regime, can be understood as a synthesis between criminal cartels and the state itself. And so, there's two reasons that trafficking in the United States, or trafficking into the United States, has shut down since January 20th, 2025. One is obviously in full credit to the Trump administration, to increased enforcement, to all the efforts that have been taken at the border. But that's one factor, and whether it's a majoritarian factor or not is kind of irrelevant to this. But I would say let's assert it's a majoritarian factor for the sake of argument. The other factor, though, which is equally significant in my view, is that the Mexican state, in cooperation with its partner cartels, elected to shut things down for a while. And that's something that we heard again and again in Mexico itself, is that there's a decision to wait out the Trump administration. And so what we have right now, and this is without disparaging the policy accomplishments at all of what's been achieved on the U.S. side, which I think is meaningful and significant, and everything that we at the Texas Public Policy Foundation, I think the American people wanted to happen, has happened. But we have to understand that there's something else that happened that we had nothing to do with, which is that the Mexican state cartel synthesis, helmed at the moment by President Claudia Sheinbaum, let's be really clear, has decided to take a pause and take a breather. And we know it because they'll tell you, like you can go to Mexico City and people will say that outright. We had one individual who's an office holder who shared with us that the deportees that go to Mexico are actually they come into the custody. There's a program called Mexico te abraza. Mexico embraces you is what it means. And so if you're deported from the United States into Mexico, you enter this Mexico te abraza program, and what it effectively means, what's happening is that you're given to the Guardia Nacional, the Mexican National Guard, and then they give you, the deportee, back to the trafficking cartels. And so what they're doing is they're building up this reserve for a future push north. I don't think there's any question in my mind, but that the crisis that we saw under the Biden regime will start again if and when the Mexicans feel it is opportune to do so. And that's one thing that we should understand, is that they can't hold it in abeyance forever. The billions in revenue that they received, these organizations still require that funding and that revenue. And it's something that we've been sounding the alarm with policymakers in a variety of spheres here in the United States, just to know that the fight is not over. Now, there's a time horizon for this. I'll say this and I'll stop there because I know you're directing the show, not me. But there's a time horizon involved. On July 1st, 2026, the United States has to decide whether or not it's going to continue with USMCA, which is the successor to NAFTA, which is the three-country free trade agreement in North America. Once that happens, if we decide to do that, and if we restrict the renegotiation of USMCA to just trade and commerce, then there's a Mexican expectation that post that, once that's locked in, a lot of our leverage is gone. If the Democrats win the midterms in 2026, that's not a prediction. I genuinely don't know, but if they do, then our leverage ebbs even more. And their goal is twofold. Their short-term goal, Claudia Sheinbaum's goal, is to protect the political class that's deeply, deeply involved with cartel activities, at the helm of which is Andrés Manuel López Obrador. And then her secondary goal, almost as important, but still secondary, is to keep the networks alive so that they can resume business later on when it's more politically opportune to do so. And if we're not cognizant of that, then we're going to find ourselves in the same situation, perhaps even a worse situation later down the road.
So this is me maybe just putting my tinfoil hat on for a little bit, but it seems interesting. Like, not only does it perhaps demonstrate Sheinbaum's collaboration with the cartels to shut it down, to shut down the human trafficking and some of the fentanyl crossing over the border, but it also seems like that's something that they, to give her some credit, that they may have been anticipating Trump's election more so than some Americans were, that they were prepared at least for his administration and being willing to shut down. Do you think that's the case?
I think there's two. So there's two characterizations I'd like to address here. The short one is that I actually don't think they thought that Trump was going to win.
Okay.
No, and I'm basing that on two things. I'm basing that on conversations that I myself had in Mexico across the preceding 2 years. You have to understand, like the Morenistas and this whole Cuatro T, this fourth transformation cohort, it's really kind of a cult. And so their receptivity to external information, with some exceptions. You've got people like Marcelo Ebrard, who's pretty cosmopolitan, and actually Claudia herself is relatively cosmopolitan. Mm-hmm. But the rank and file are really not. It is a closed information ecosystem. And so part of the reason that we were treated with a lot of, just to be blunt, naked contempt by a lot of these individuals who were still in Mexican governance was because they thought that the what they called the ultraderechistas, the extreme right, was never going to come back into power. Well, surprise, we did. But if you had polled, I think the median Morena office holder on November 4th, 2024, they would have said Kamala's going to win tomorrow. So I do think they were taken by surprise a bit. Now, that being said, they did have a plan and they executed it. The other thing that I want to address, though, Ariana, is and this is not meaningless nuance. I think it's actually important nuance. So it's important to say, I don't think President Sheinbaum actually collaborates with cartels. I want to be clear. I think Andrés Manuel did. I mean, he clearly sanctioned this whole relationship with the Sinaloa cartel that went back 2 decades. Sheinbaum presides over, because there's no evidence that I've ever seen that she herself is personally corrupt. Andrés Manuel, there's a lot of evidence of that. With Claudia, there's just nothing's ever come to light, so we shouldn't accuse her of things that we just don't know. But she does preside over a party apparatus that is itself deeply complicit with the cartels, and that may seem like a distinction without a difference, but it's really not. And the reason that it's not is because if you actually, on the U.S. side, you have to have a fundamentally different policy approach to somebody who presides over a corrupt superstructure versus someone who is actually corrupt himself. Mm-hmm. I don't think Claudia Sheinbaum is corrupt herself, but she flies cover for the corruption of her party and her coalition that is itself a threat to the United States. But with that, I'll fall silent here. We can take this wherever you want. But what that does is that opens up possibilities for us, depending on what her long-term or even proximate imperatives are for her own political survival and flourishing.
Do you think that helps us to recognize that, though, if she doesn't have like as clear of ties as like you were talking about that AMLO clearly did? Does that show us a little bit more about her ideology then? Like, is it her ideology that keeps her in line with that party? She's
a truly, that great insight, and you're correct. She is a true left ideologue. I was told an anecdote by somebody who was in the room with her. Again, I hate to be vague like this whole time. Like, somebody told me, so you can consider that this is all unverified. So take it with a grain of salt. But somebody who was in the room with her told me an anecdote in which there was somebody who made a comment to her that, well, obviously, like Presidenta, now that you're in charge, it's a different administration with a different goal. And she actually raised a finger and she stopped him. And she said, no, it's lo mismo. It's the same. So we're the same. We have the same goals. This is the second, and she said something that she said in Spanish, somos el segundo piso de la transformación, like we're the second story of the fourth transformation of Mexican society. And she really means it. Like she really does see, and there's every reason to believe that she's totally sincere that she is the continuation and the fulfillment of what Andrés Manuel set in motion, which is essentially the Venezuelaization, if I can coin a term, of the Mexican state and society. And she means it. She's a fully committed ideologue in that respect. And she's going to do it if allowed to do it.
So you said that that she was saying that she's like the second story to that transformation, but you said it's the fourth.
Oh yes, I'm sorry.
What do you mean by that?
Yeah, okay.
I don't know. I actually haven't heard this before. What are the different stages of this?
It's so tiresome to talk about these transformations. So this was I think this originated with Andrés Manuel. I'm 99% sure, but he certainly, if it didn't originate with him, he's the one who brought it into currency in Mexican civics. So there's an idea that Mexican society has been remade 4 different times, and if I'm remembering correctly, so some wit on the internet, correct me if I'm wrong about this, but the 4 transformations are Mexican independence, that's transformation number 1. The reform era under Benito Juarez is transformation number 2. The Mexican Revolution in 1910, 1920, more or less, is transformation number 3. And so at each point, there's like this redefinition of what it means to be Mexican, of the nature of the Mexican state. And so Andrés Manuel himself, this is kind of his messianic ego talking, his presidency is the 4th transformation of Mexican society. And so what he's saying is that the Moreno regime is equivalent to independence, Benito Juarez, and the revolution. Like that's how significant it is. And I guess like what do all these have in common? If you wanted to be a cynic, is that swaths of Mexicans were slaughtered in each one of these. So which has actually turned out to be true under the 4T as well. So Claudia is totally bought into that. Like they are fundamentally reordering Mexican society along left ideologue lines.
And what do you mean by left ideologue lines? What do you see as
well, I wasn't kidding about
existing within the Mexican version of that.
Yeah, no. I mean, I wasn't kidding about the Venezuela part because that really is the model, and it's more or less explicit. In August, we'll have to put this in the show notes, but in August 2024, post-election, totally unhelpful. But if they'd published it pre-election, people might not have voted for him. Morena actually published its agenda for Mexico, and it's
how transparent of them.
Well, sure, yeah, but the voter payments went through, so that's what matters. But it talks about really what they want to do, and so I struggle to synopsize it, but essentially what you're talking about is a soft Sovietization of Mexican society in which the people and local councils are elevated to a 4th branch of government. You have the military taking over a lot of the economy. You have, something that they've already achieved, which is a dissolution, effectively judicial independence throughout Mexico. And so it really is sort of this, it's Latin American tinged, but its ideological roots actually lay in European leftism. A lot of so if you think about, I hate to use the word Soviet because it makes people think of the USSR. That's not what I'm getting at. But think about like early Bolshevism, and you had these workers' Soviets, like local councils that are controlling everything, and this idea that they are superior to anything. There's no such thing as an independent institution in society. Like all this is current now in Mexican governing ideology. And part of the reason the cartels have gained so much power is that they've been willing to fund all of this, because of course the cartels love diminishing independent institutions and crippling the judiciary and all this stuff that ends up happening when power is simultaneously devolved and accentuated at the central level, which sounds like a paradox until you understand how the mechanisms, the interaction between the two work. It's totally fruitful territory for organized crime, and that's why they're pouring money into Morena coffers to see it happen.
Well, as we've mentioned that, this seems to be their goal, and that's what they're working towards. But at least on the cartel side, they're willing to put a pause on things until, because we'll still have yet to see. But you had already mentioned the USMCA reauthorization negotiations.
Right. So
let's dive into that. So what is that, and when is that going to happen?
So something interesting, and I think very prescient, that President Trump compelled when NAFTA was renegotiated in 2018. Sorry. It was renegotiated in 2018, but USMCA was implemented in 2019. So it's a 6-year clock. And effectively at the 6-year mark, each of the 3 constituent nations, Canada, the U.S., and Mexico, have to say whether or not they want to continue with USMCA, renegotiate it, or just withdraw from it. And once that happens, then there's essentially like a decade-long clock that starts, and so it winds down. But the political reality is that if any one of the three nations says that they're out, that it's effectively dead right away. I mean, there's nothing stopping any of the three nations from doing as they will with regard to tariffs, trade restrictions, whatever else. So the reality is that if anybody withdraws, it's not like they're trapped in it for another decade. It's effectively a dead letter. So the United States is going to take advantage of it. I personally have not seen a lot by way of what the agenda is for the reauthorization of USMCA. I know that there are a lot of interests that want us to restrict that renegotiation to just commerce and trade issues, which is formally the ambit of the treaty. But what we're advocating for very explicitly, and what we advocate for in this memorandum that we posted today, is that the reauthorization of USMCA needs to be the leverage in the moment to renegotiate the entirety of the U.S.-Mexico relationship, specifically because the bet on NAFTA in 1994, which is the direct predecessor of USMCA, was a bet that if the United States liberalized trade with Mexico, that Mexico itself would liberalize, become a functioning, peaceful, pluralistic democracy in the American model, and also become a good neighbor. It's the same bet that we laid on the People's Republic of China too, and it totally hasn't worked. It turns out that the post-war European model doesn't actually apply in other parts of the world to the way that we think it does. And so that bet having failed, the Mexicans, on the Mexican side, they'd love nothing more than to restrict it to trade and commerce. In fact, I had one guy who's a good guy. He'll recognize himself immediately as I say this, but so sorry, you know who you are on this. But he actually said to me, this is verbatim, he said, let the security people worry about the security part of it. Well, our answer to that has to be no. If Mexico did not fulfill either the explicit or implicit terms of NAFTA from 1994, then USMCA renegotiation in 2026 is the opportunity to both bring them into line on the explicit parts of the deal, but also make the implicit explicit, and say that if you want to enjoy the benefits of trade with the United States, if you want to enjoy the fruits of NAFTA, which have been tremendously good for your country, even as your civics have fallen apart and hundreds of thousands of Mexicans have been killed in cartel wars, then you need to commit to the terms of the deal, which are be a good security partner, be a good neighbor, exercise full sovereignty over your own territory, the whole range of it. And so what we're encouraging here, what I encourage, and what the Texas Public Policy Foundation encourages, is for U.S. policymakers to understand that we have a moment to relitigate the entirety of the relationship. And concurrent with that, I think it's important to say that if the Mexicans don't want to do it, we should walk away. And I say that with regret because, as you know, I'm a South Texan, you're a South Texan. Why is there a middle class in South Texas? It's because of NAFTA. It's because of that trade. And I am incredibly reluctant. If J.D. Vance can view politics through the lens of, Appalachian Ohio, then I feel free to view politics through the lens of dusty South Texas. And it would be terrible for dusty South Texas to shut down Mexican trade. But I think the crisis comes now or later, and unfortunately, it is an indicator of how bad I think things are going to get in Mexico, and to what a malign place the Moreno regime is taking its country. That I do think we need to be willing to walk away from it. Ultimately, the United States, South Texas does need trade with Mexico, but ultimately, the United States writ large does not require access to Mexico to prosper. Mexico does require access to the United States to prosper. That's true. And we have never fully leveraged that. We should do so now.
So looking into a crystal ball, let's say U.S. takes these ideas up and is like, Josh, that's phenomenal. I'm going to do exactly that. They end up having to walk away.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, yeah.
But if Mexico does have to walk away and the United States stands true to that, do you see Mexico returning to the table eventually, realizing that they need America as a partner?
Yes, I think there's. I mean, look.
So it's a long-term strategy here that we're looking at,
and it has to be long-term, right? Look, I mean, the Mexicans are engaging in long-term strategy. Again, their diplomatic apparatus is extremely intelligent. They're very good. They're very canny. We should never condescend to them, especially when they're engaged with the United States, because they've taken our measure. They study us quite closely, probably more closely than we do them in a lot of ways. And so, yeah, I do think it's true. And unfortunately, I mean, doesn't speak well of them. Their primary goal, writ large, and this is not the welfare of ordinary Mexicans. I mean, it never has been. You wouldn't run a country like that if you had the welfare of an ordinary Mexican at heart. It is enrichment. Yeah, and it is protection of themselves, and they cannot get the enrichment by trade with anybody else, especially if we end up doing what I suspect we're going to do under the Trump administration. This has been one of the most heartening things that I've seen since January 20th, is if we actually enforce the Monroe Doctrine and the Roosevelt Corollary and establish hemispheric dominance, all of which I actually do think the White House is intent upon doing, then the Mexicans don't have a strategic alternative to us, as much as they might wish that it's China or anybody else. And so they'll come now, they'll come later. Let them come.
And then just speak. One of the things that just stood out is like speaking to that, like the way that the elite Mexican ruling class treats things in terms of that enrichment. I know that leftists in the United States like to talk about this like income disparity that exists between like the lowest class in America and the highest one, but the disgusting impoverished conditions that are left to just exist in Mexico with very little attention from the ruling class is just absolutely horrific.
Well,
like, I mean, just thinking about like as someone who's seen Tent City in like different parts of America, from like, you know, what you see in parts of San Diego that have gotten really bad to a few years ago in Austin versus like going through Mexico and passing by just shacks. It's there. I think that there's a difference there.
Many years ago, in a previous life, I worked in Illinois to expiate my sins, and one of the things that really shocked me when I was new there was learning that for the Democratic vote buying machine in East St. Louis, which is across the Mississippi, on the Illinois side was apparently one loose cigarette. You could buy a vote for one loose cigarette, and so you would cast your vote and get your cigarette, or maybe it was the reverse. I mean, it doesn't really matter either way. But that's how cheap it was, and it was driven. It was driven by a lot of different factors, but one of which was just plain old impoverishment. That phenomenon exists around the world. It certainly exists in Mexico, and when you think about one of the things that AMLO very smartly set up was these. Bienestar, like these welfare payments that are direct cash payments to individual Mexicans. And Mexico, of course, has this horrifyingly high poverty rate, and so these people genuinely benefit from it. By the way, I say this with complete empathy toward the recipients of these cash payments, but there's a quid pro quo attached to it, and one of them is that you're gonna vote for Morena. And so, in a situation like that, why would you be in a rush to improve people to the point where they don't need that support?
Right. Well, you're utilizing that as one of your tools in your arsenal,
I guess.
What a
perverse incentive.
And then, speaking, I guess, to that leftist ideology that we at least clearly see now, it's part of like the Mexican elite's philosophy. Something that's interesting about that, and something that you point to in the memorandum, is this tie that you see between cartels and left-wing type governments, not only in Mexico, but throughout Latin America. So what do you think, where do you think that tie comes from, and what's happening there?
Yeah. So great question. And this is something that I would encourage U.S. policymakers to think more deeply about. It is not 100% true. I want to say it up front, the exceptions to the rule. It's not 100% true that cartels only liaise with left-wing governments, but they mostly do. And the reason that they mostly do, and the reason that you see cartel and organized crime involvement with leftist governance in Venezuela, in Colombia to some extent, in Ecuador for sure. There's an election in Ecuador on April 13th. That's going to determine which way that country goes. But the left is very enmeshed with organized crime. And then in Nicaragua, in Cuba, and in Mexico for sure. The reason is that, as it was explained to me by multiple individuals, and I already sort of had this thesis, but it was good to hear it confirmed by people on the ground, is that you get the circular exchange between the two. So what the cartels provide to the left is cash and votes. Now, the votes are coerced, but it's cash and votes that the left otherwise would not have, because the business community and the centers, the concentrations of capital, and the people that can fund campaigns, I mean, they're not normally giving to the left like they do now that the left has power, but ordinarily they wouldn't be given to the left. And then, of course, the votes don't necessarily come if you don't have the cash. So the cartels are able to supply that to these leftist parties in great numbers. And then in exchange, what the leftist parties and the office holders provide to the cartels is political cover, obviously. And so it's protection of the state. It's, it varies from place to place. You can get assistance in logistical networks. You can, this happens in Mexico relatively often. You can get the army to go kill your business rivals for you, which happens a lot. And so that's why you get the synthesis, and that's why it's almost entirely on the left these days and give them credit. It's a working model. It's an evil working model, but it's a model that they have.
Wait, so are you saying that it's because they happen to be the people in power that they're the ones who are working with them, or do you think that it
No.
leads to it?
No. Again, what I want to make clear, I'm not, and I want to qualify this appropriately. I'm not making the case that the cartels only work with lefties.
Right.
I'm saying that they mostly do, and the reason that they mostly do, that they prefer the left, is because the left needs the cartels to provide a financial and vote base that otherwise does not organically exist in their host societies. But what that means from a policy standpoint, and again, we have to understand this, and I suspect the relevant people in the Trump administration do. Chris Landau was just confirmed as Deputy Secretary of State. Thank God. I mean, really, I'm so excited to see him back. Chris, I'm going to send this to you afterwards, but we're happy to have you here. But what that means is that you can't pursue an effective policy against transnational organized crime, against cartels in the Western Hemisphere, without pursuing a policy and having a policy against leftist governance in the Western Hemisphere. You have to do both. Our counsel has always been that if you have to pick one, it's an artificial dichotomy, but if you have to pick fighting crime or fighting the left, fight the left, because once the left is defeated and its political power is gone, then the cartels and the criminal networks are massively exposed. And then you can partner with local power holders, whether they're on the right or center, it doesn't matter, or maybe even a clean left if there is such a thing, to get the job done.
That's interesting. And all of this research where you keep pointing to, like, talking to people on the ground, the thing that's continues to come up during this episode is you can't always name the names of what you're hearing. And so let's talk about that. Like, what makes this kind of research more difficult? I think it's very different than how we do our other kinds of research with people here in America. So why does that distinction exist?
People, look, for obvious reasons, people can't go on the record in a lot of cases. And so we talk to individuals who have seen things, or in some cases have done things that would get them in trouble. People are killed for this. The stakes are very high. We talked to one man. I won't give much specifics on him, but he ended up abandoning, how would I characterize it, a public role, let's say, in doing some good things because the cartels threatened to kill his little girls. And it was interesting that this particular guy was embarrassed by this. And I told him, I said, listen, I'd be out in a heartbeat. I care about, I think anybody would care about the welfare of their children above any public mission. And so there's something actually virtuous about it, because it's something virtuous that the bad guys leverage. But yeah, you're totally right. It makes it quite difficult to adhere to what would be the gold standard of policy research, which is reproducible results. Well, we talk to this guy, you can go talk to him, you can see, here's a fact pattern, here's a narrative, here's a story. And so you can't get that. And it becomes difficult to assess. Like I actually have great empathy for those, who are going to read my memorandum, or, reporting from some of the really good people who report on this. Let's say like who's good? Like Juan Grillo is really good. Falco Ernst is good. On the U.S. side of the border, Julio Rosas is good. I disagree with all these people. They're really good, but they too have contacts. And, in the end, from a public disputation standpoint, I talk to this guy, you see. And it's hard for policymakers to parse out. So I do have empathy for it. I think all we can do as we advocate for policy is you ultimately can't rely on the anecdote. What you have to do is rise above and provide, based upon the anecdote, but you have to provide an explanatory framework for what's happening. And then that framework has to be tested against reality. We started the show, one of my frameworks is that Claudia is not in control. She's in control. And so my framework has to change. But the theory of the Mexican state that we've advocated for consistently since December 2019, I can trace it that long, has never been proven wrong. It's never been discounted. In fact, it's only been validated as we go. And so that's, from a self-interest standpoint, self-interest of the Texas Public Policy Foundation, I would say look to that. Do we provide an explanatory framework? And do we provide, since it's explanatory, how predictive is it? And our record's pretty good there.
Yeah. And so just being someone who's one of the key players that's going into Mexico, getting this kind of research out there, where can people find this memorandum and more information if they're looking for it?
You're so kind to call me a key player. You call me a key player and my mom says I'm handsome. So, between the two of you. Yes. So go find a memorandum at texaspolicy.com. There's a little press release. So as we're recording this, it is Monday, March 31st, I think.
Yes.
So I think the show will go up in the next 24 hours or so. But if you go there,
it's not an April Fool's joke if it's not April 1st.
No, it's actually not April 1st. But it's called the Mexico Threat Situation Memorandum. So you can find it if you search at texaspolicy.com. We'll have a link in the show description for it. But go find it, read it. It's 6 pages long, but you seem to enjoy it. So
yes, it's very digestible, great bullet pointed things. So I feel like I can break it up, understand it well. Yeah.
Thank you.
So definitely must check out work they've written.
Much appreciated. No. I appreciate your confidence in it. And look, for Americans watching, whether you're in Washington, D.C. or Texas or anywhere else, just know that we've taken great strides. The advent of President Trump has been a tremendous positive development in which a lot of things have gotten done that were never going to get done before. What remains before us now is to drive home the win, and I hope we can do that.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Josh, for shedding light on all of this. Everyone, thank you guys so much for watching The Hard Country, and we'll see you next time.